Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Jones. I'm with SAFE, and we'd like to welcome you today to our webinar on Veterans and Mobility Solutions, looking at emerging benefits and challenges of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles for veterans with disabilities. We have a great panel for you today, and I'll introduce them in a couple of moments. Just a little bit of background about SAFE. We are a nonprofit. We've been around for about 20 years, and we primarily look at how we can get the United States off of fossil fuels, as we see it as a strategic priority, and also has a lot of ancillary social and economic benefits as well. We are joined by our sister organization, the Electrification Coalition. Their primary mission is looking at advocating for policies to get us to electric vehicles. They see that, and we see it as a main mover in getting us off of fossil fuels. And over the time of the Electrification Coalition's time, we have really looked at veterans and how we can partner with our veteran community with looking at opportunities for job growth within EVs. And we're also looking as we talk about today, how can electric and autonomous vehicles assist our disabled veterans in gaining mobility and gaining more freedom. This webinar was really kind of a genesis between Aaron Viles, Allanté, Dr. Allanté Whitmore with our Coalition for Reimagined Mobility, and myself. I'm a retired Marine with multiple tours in Iraq. And we sat down and talked about how we could look at our current efforts in working with some of the great folks that are out there who you'll meet today, who are working in both the veteran space and the autonomous vehicle space, and look at ways that we can make lives better for our veterans. An example that comes to mind is a young veteran I know, a young non-commissioned officer who was severely wounded in Afghanistan. He lost an eye, lost a hand, and both of his legs, and he is wheelchair bound. He struggles to get to his VA appointments. He's helped by a lot of nonprofit groups and by the VA, but maybe we could imagine a future in the not so distant time forward where he opens up an app, an autonomous electric vehicle comes to his house that is adapted for his use, that is adapted for wheelchair and handicapped use. He's able to move into this vehicle, it straps him down, secures him safely, takes him to his VA medical appointment, waits for him there, comes back, and then takes him shopping and then home. And all of this, I think, is possible, but it's going to take a lot of work. And that's what our panelists are going to talk to today. Like I said, we have a great panel, and I'll introduce them now. Dr. Allanté Whitmore, who is with our Coalition for Reimagined Mobility, will be the main facilitator today. She works in the autonomous vehicle environment and really works hard at advocating and advancing autonomous vehicle policy. Mr. Al Curtis, who's a U.S. Army veteran, who's a Fleet Services Director for Cobb County, Georgia, and he's also on our Veterans for Electric Vehicles Steering Committee member. Mr. Lee Page, Senior Associate Advocate Director, Paralyzed Veterans of America. Ms. Tammy Meehan Russell, President and Chief Strategist for PLUM Catalyst, and Ms. Daisy Wall, Director of Government Business for May Mobility. So like I said, we have a great panel here today. We have some great areas to look at. This area we think has a lot of promise. It's already being practiced in the field. And what we have today is a great mix of practitioners, folks who are working at it theoretically, and some of our veterans advocates who can talk to how we can make this dream a reality. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Al Curtis for his presentation. Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Colonel. As Colonel mentioned, my name is Al Curtis. I'm the Director of the Cobb County Fleet Management, and also on the steering committee for Veterans for Electric Vehicles, which again is supported by the Electrification Coalition. As a military veteran, I was really proud to serve in the Army and was excited about the global electric vehicle movement, and Cobb County is part of it. And we're experiencing right now. The steps are being taken by the U.S. leadership in transportation, automotive manufacturing, as we transition from gas, diesel-powered vehicles accelerates. One of the reasons I'm excited about this transition, this will definitely advance the nation's energy security, as the Colonel talked about. And another reason, the number of good paying jobs that electrification is actually the shift in moving towards electrification is gonna happen. And these jobs are totally benefit for our veterans, and they're suited for our veterans as well. EVs are how the United States and how we're gonna go from building our automotive sector for the future. The automotive sector right now supports about 9.9 million jobs and has added nearly 1 trillion into the economy each year. From minerals needed to creating batteries throughout the entire EV supply chain. United States investment in EVs means good paying jobs at every level. Thankfully, President Biden and Congress is making a huge investment in the EV and battery supply chain, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure law. Our nation is committing to an EV future. The Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act includes about $5 billion for the build out of the nationwide EV charging network and about $2.5 billion in EV charging station grants, which $1.25 billion will actually serve the disadvantaged communities and rural areas. $2.5 billion will replace dirty school buses with clean electric school buses, which I'm very excited about that as well. And about $6.1 billion of battery producing manufacturing and recycling grants. Paired with the Inflation Reduction Act, which invests about $370 billion in climate and energy programs, including significant tax credits to build a larger EV market and requiring domestic sources of batteries and vehicles. Veterans are definitely well suited for the benefit of this enormous manufacturing expansion in the US, which is, we've been waiting for this particular type of expansion for some time now. I now hire military veterans in my workforce, and they're definitely well suited to compete and do the best jobs in ushering in our EV movement as well. So what Cobb County has done, we've been in the EV space for about 8 years. We started out early back in 2014 with deploying about 16 electric vehicles when electric vehicles were something that people thought we weren't ready for. Since then, we've grown our EV fleet to about 66 fully electric vehicles. We have we have the Ford Lightning, we have the Ford Mach-E, we have EV Transits that are coming on board, we have the Chevy Bolts. We have a larger diversity amount of vehicles in the electric vehicle space, and many hybrids as well deployed into our departments. We've embraced electrification from the beginning, and we have many of our veterans working in my department itself that have a vast amount of experience in EV, in our EV transition as well. Dealing with electric vehicles, of course, there's not many moving parts. There's about 20 moving parts on the vehicles. So we've had a significant reduction in breakdowns, significant reductions in cost. Of course, without using gas, we're using electricity, which is saving all of our departments all around. So it's been basically a win-win in our electric vehicle movement, and we will continue to advocate for our sustainability in the county and the actual country. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Allanté Whitmore, Director of Safe Autonomous Vehicle Initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Al, for all of your introductory statements. I think that it was right, hit the nail around the head, creating a win-win situation. And so I'd like to jump into a quick presentation about the AV initiative and share a bit of our background and what we're thinking about as it relates to serving this community. So the AV initiative started in 2014. We're nearing a decade as a part of the safe space, where we are producing high quality fact-based analysis and policy recommendations for lawmakers, regulatory agencies, and the public. And we've covered a number of different social and economic benefits through autonomy and through automated vehicles. We've looked at workforce benefits, how autonomous vehicles can improve accessibility for people with disabilities, which is something really important in this conversation we're having today. We've also explored the economic benefits and even made policy recommendations for a federal framework around deploying autonomous vehicles at a wider scale than currently available. Our first major report was entitled Self-Driving Cars, the Impact on People with Disabilities. And here we looked at the opportunities for increasing accessibility and exploring obstacles for disabled communities and what it could look like with better transportation access in this community. And the graphic here to your right is showing a breakdown of the mode share split between people with disabilities, which are in the green, and those without disabilities in the yellow. And what we see here in the bottom that's circled is that when people with disabilities are typically using people without disabilities, are using all transportation modes more than those with people without disabilities. And so people with disabilities are typically going to be using taxi cabs, motorized personal transportation, and paratransit to get around. And paratransit in our system has not been known in every place to be the best service. That can be sometimes where you have to make a reservation for service the day before, and it could be an all-day trip for just a trip that may take someone without disability in their own personal vehicle, a quick trip to the doctor's office. And so when we think about our veterans community and the services they're trying to access, and they may not be able to use their own vehicle and they're relying on these three modes, there's an opportunity here for us to not couple electrification and automation to really serve this community in a better way by providing more options and more mode options for them. Next, and Al brought up this point too, is the opportunity for employment and how automation can also extend the market for individuals who maybe currently cannot drive. And so on-demand, point-to-point AV transit provides reliable and affordable and efficient travel for our veterans with disabilities who want to be a part of our workforce. And this is from a study we did in 2020, looking at economic opportunities through AV technology. And here we see that not only could AV transportation reduce the household cost for transportation, but also expanding, again, that pool of opportunities available. What we see here is a smaller city, and the yellow circle shows the radius available with public transportation, personal transportation, but the green shows the expanded opportunities that are available with a point-to-point system with automation. And so that means there are more opportunities for our veterans who want to enter the workforce by adding this option, in addition to more opportunities and options for getting to work. And so we really think about how we can serve these communities better. And we really believe electrification coupled with automation provide a really great opportunity. Finally, these two studies, along with the work we've done before, are really influencing the work we're doing now, and the idea that actual mobility creates social mobility. And so that's the theme of both the last two slides, of the opportunity not only to have access to more education, to social services, to any medical services our veterans may need, but also an opportunity to access employment opportunities as well. So very excited for this conversation and to moderate with this a bit about the AV initiative underway. I'm going to actually hand it off to Lee Page, who'll be sharing a bit about PVA.
Thanks, Allanté. My name is Lee Page, and I'm with PVA, Paralyzed Veterans of America. We're a national nonprofit veteran service organization. We've got 30 some odd chapters across the country, and our organization was founded back in 1946. All of our members are paralyzed, meaning they have spinal cord injury or disability. And originally, and so they all use wheelchairs, basically. And I want to thank SAFE for the invitation to talk on this issue. The realities are for people with disabilities, especially wheelchair users, such as our organization, accessible autonomous vehicles are not really readily available. Currently, one of the things we recognized as an organization is that transportation is the key to mobilization. Life is beyond the VA hospital. And so my job role is to do compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA that passed back in 1990, and also the Air Carrier Access Act. Both of those laws basically pertain to air travel and then other modes of transportation, such as fixed route buses and other fixed route systems. Autonomous vehicles, this is why we're so very interested in autonomous vehicles, is because currently our members, if they don't have access to fixed route, drive minivans and have to have those aftermarket modifications made. And that means you have to add a lift or some sort of ramp to the vehicle by an aftermarket modification organization. And the reason is because the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, such as Ford, GM, those Detroit auto manufacturers, really don't take accessibility into consideration when it comes to cars and vehicles on a regular basis for a person in a wheelchair. I mean, I myself drive a car. I transfer out of my wheelchair. It has hand controls, which allows me to access the accelerator and the brake. But I am fortunate because I use a manual wheelchair. If I was in a power wheelchair, I would not have that opportunity. So with autonomous vehicles, and I'll give you an example of something I just found out over the weekend, is the city of Phoenix has a contract with Jaguar, the British Jaguar car company, that is providing an autonomous shuttle from downtown Phoenix to the airport, backwards and forwards. Well, it's not wheelchair accessible. The vehicle that's being provided is a 4-door Jaguar crossover vehicle, and it's on an autonomous route. I'm not really sure if it has a driver or not, but it was just a news thing that I saw over the weekend. The realities are for wheelchair users, we need to have physical access to get into an autonomous vehicle. And that means some sort of ramp or lift that would allow us into the vehicle. Then we need, if this is truly autonomous, then we would, without a driver, then you need to have a mechanism that would allow the person with the disability to secure his wheelchair in an accessible format, somehow, ensure that he has, safety, whether if there's a possibility for him to transfer out of the wheelchair onto a bench, maybe not, somehow to interact with the vehicle when it comes to notification as to when he wants to get out of the vehicle, when that vehicle makes a stop. And there's a whole, I think, litany of issues when it comes to physical access that just aren't really being considered for people with wheelchairs. Now, an autonomous vehicle for an able-bodied person who has a disability might be a very accessible mode of transportation. It's very much needed. Say people who are blind, who can't drive cars currently because of their vision loss, an autonomous vehicle will give them great independence from getting from point A to point B. So anyway, for our members and wheelchair users across the country, I assume currently autonomous vehicles that are, up and running, whether it's on a test basis or on a real fixed route in the cities of San Francisco and Phoenix and other places, maybe Vegas. I'm not sure what the wheelchair accessibility of those vehicles are and what the plan is to ensure access for wheelchairs in the future.
Thank you, Lee, so much for sharing your thoughts. I think you made some great points about making accessibility making it sure it's not an afterthought and an aftermarket modification. And I think that tees up our next speakers perfectly. I want to introduce again Tammy and Daisy. I'm going to hand it over to you all to share what you are working on.
My name is Tammy Meehan Russell, and I am the president and what I call the chief catalyst of the PLUM Catalyst, which is a strategy and innovation firm. But also for the purposes of this discussion, the project manager for the exciting Go Marty project, which is what we're here to talk about today, is give you an actual case study example of a project that's going on and in partnership. For this presentation, I also have Daisy on. And so Daisy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm Daisy Wall. I'm the Director of Government Business at May Mobility, and we're very excited to be here working on the Go Marty project. Tammy will talk a little bit about the project itself, but Lee, I mean, it really hit home, you know, in terms of accessibility and making it a priority within autonomy. I mean, we've spent so much money in this sector. And one of the things that I'll be talking about, and Tammy will be talking about, is our commitment to accessibility specifically. This Go Marty project is actually derived from the idea of studying how seniors and people with disabilities actually can adopt autonomy and socialize autonomy, and what are some of those things, you know, that we need to keep an eye out for. And so I won't steal Tammy's thunder. I know we'll talk a little bit more about this, but there are, you know, autonomous vehicle companies out there that care a lot about accessibility and want to make it part of the mission. And we'll dive deep into that in a little bit here.
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. It's okay. We can steal each other's thunder. I think that you can't talk about this topic enough. So
I know.
So I thought what we could go through here for an agenda. Actually, first, obviously, we have our introductions. I wanted to give an overview of the pilot zone. As you can see, definitely want to share with you the partners and the project goals, and finally get into our approach and talk about the engagement that we've done, because a big part of this project was actually focused on the community listening, which we wanted to make sure we focused on a project that would be applicable to all. And so, as we said just before, that means that accessibility was not the last thing we talked about. It was actually the first thing we talked about. And so we wanted to make sure we were addressing the ridership that would have the most difficult access today, and give them access first, think about them first, and then by nature, you're providing a completely inclusive option. I do want to make sure to highlight that this is a pilot. We still call it a test. And so we aren't calling it a service because we are learning. We are learning a lot as we go. And so there's a lot of lessons learned even just after a few months of launching our operations. And finally, Daisy will talk a lot about what May is doing and what May has done to prepare for this launch and continues to do to focus on May Mobility's mission of improving accessibility and doing that through an actual pilot project that we can talk about. So with that, I'll just dive into the project itself. So this is a list of our partners. As you can see on this map, it's a lot of partners that we brought to the table. So the way I approached planning of a project like this was to bring everyone together, and we were collaborative planning. And so that meant our agencies were at the table, obviously May and VIA, our technology partners, and then nonprofit partners, which really were advocating, especially in that area of accessibility for seniors, differently abled, those with physical challenges, et cetera. And then we wanted to make sure we addressed the topic of workforce as well as some research. So we have our academic and research partners listed there. So the Next Career Pathway program represents a high school and middle school career pathway program that is about 7 different schools in the area. And the Itasca Community College is a local college that actually is not too far off of our route. And University of Minnesota provides some research help and data management. So getting into our goals of our project, in the top left, we wanted to make sure we did not forget, and I'll highlight a little bit more about where this project is located, but we did not forget that we were in the learning phase of where this technology is. So we want to make sure we advance and inform the autonomous vehicle technology for a rural and winter condition. This project is very much rural, and I'll show you on a map what we're talking about. But we want to make sure that we recognize we're learning a lot, and we wanted to be able to advance and inform the technology of how you apply this in this area. In the bottom left, we haven't already talked about this enough, so we'll just mention it again. We had a very big focus on accessibility, and we continue to have that focus. And we can talk through some specific things we did with the vehicles, with the actual zone of operation, as well as the research that's all focused on accessibility. In the upper right, we wanted to make sure we were doing a really good job of engaging with the community. You can have a great technology, but if the community is not engaged and building trust in it and they don't use it, ultimately the project was a bit pointless. And so how do we engage and build that engagement throughout the process? So using a method of engagement called the IAP2 model, which takes people through the process of understanding the technology, and ultimately at the end, they feel empowered that they made the decision to bring the technology to their community. And so we wanted to do a deep level of community engagement, which I'll highlight an example of a community listening sessions that we did up front before actually putting any technology on the road. And then we talked about workforce development and economic development already, and the importance of bringing that into any project. But we definitely have kept that top of mind here. So our pilot zone I mentioned, Go Marty stands for Minnesota's Autonomous Rural Transit Initiative. So it is located in Minnesota. It's located in the community of Grand Rapids, which is found in Itasca County in Minnesota, a population of about 11,000 people. So it is rural. You can see the demographic info is listed there through the 2010 census data. And our pilot zone is about 17 square miles within Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So it is the largest, my knowledge, Daisy, you can tell me if I'm wrong, from my experience, I think this is the largest AV deployment as for a geographic area so far. So a quick snapshot about Go Marty. We have 18 months of shuttle operations scheduled, so that will go through March of 2024 is where the funding takes us. We have 5 shuttles that are located in that 17 or 16 and a half square mile area. The shuttles are operating on demand by using an app, a May Mobility app that you can call them up through the app, or you can call a local call center, which we have set up, which is First Call for Help 211. So again, addressing that topic of accessibility not only means physical challenges, but maybe those who don't use cell phones or don't have access to cell phones aren't comfortable using cell phones. We wanted to set up a call center to make sure people could pick up a phone and make a phone call for a ride, just as if they would use the app. And the other thing the call center is doing is also providing some engagement support and educating people when they need to better understand about the technology, ask some questions about the zone. They can make a phone call to 211, which makes it very comfortable for them. 3 shuttles are wheelchair accessible, so 3 of the 5. And so Daisy can talk a little bit more about that. And we also have some student experience projects, which included some career pathway work for the local high school students to install fixtures along our route that the shuttle can use to do what's called localization. And so that was really exciting for the students. That project actually was featured during our media day with Senator Klobuchar when she came, and the students were there and able to take some pictures and talk about their project. So that was exciting. And then the rides are free. So the funding we have offers a free ride for this 18 months, which was important for us to be able to show that this is a technology you can step in, you can trust, and there's no limitation of financial constraint in actually trying out the technology. We don't know that that's the model that will continue to be used forward in the future, because we honestly don't know what the funding can look like as we move forward. But for this pilot, we wanted to make sure it was offered for free. And And finally, it is the first rural large-scale public launch of an autonomous vehicle deployment. So we're pretty excited about that. I mentioned the deep community engagement. And so one of the things I wanted to go back and talk about, which is what Lee had mentioned, which is in quality of life or actual social activities, or maybe Allanté, you mentioned this as well. And that is, we wanted to complement existing service. There is an existing transit provider there called Arrowhead Transit. And so there are limited hours of operation today for Arrowhead, so much so that people were feeling like, and we can give you some specific examples of what we heard, but social activities became a constraint for them, or setting up doctor's appointments within certain hours. So we went out into the community and we held 3 community listening sessions under various kind of themes. One was targeted at business owners, one was more targeted at senior communities, senior living centers, and then one was actually at the county service provider, where we held that with other service providers and potential riders. And what we heard loud and clear was they wanted to have improved access to social activities, which meant evening and weekends. And we highlighted the specific points of interest that they were looking for. So what we did with this information then is we defined our hours of operation, and we defined our actual stops along the route. And so we came up with almost 70 stops along this route. That doesn't mean it's a circulator. It doesn't stop at every single stop, but it is offered as an option for the rider to be able to select when they ask for a ride. And with that, now I'm going to turn it over to Daisy so she can talk specifically about May and the technology we've got here on this route.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tammy. So there's a couple of things that make this pilot or program, if you will, from our standpoint, is that it is rural, and most people don't know that even though rural communities are there, that veterans actually populate the majority of rural communities as well, and so we're very excited about that because I think this is a great example of how this can extend to rural communities, and autonomous vehicle companies in general tend to stick to the Sun Belt and then also to urban areas. Primarily to test the technology, and then also to avoid extreme weather conditions. Our philosophy here at May is basically we want to make autonomy as inclusive as possible, and that means really pushing the limits in terms of where we can take the technology, and that means making sure that we are looking at accessibility, looking at areas that are colder than maybe a lot of other companies may be looking for, and then also really looking at making sure that we're looking at rural communities, urban communities, suburban communities, all types of communities and use cases as possible, as many as possible. So we've launched in 10 cities across the US and Japan, and our turnkey model really includes everything. It's the autonomous technology, the routing, the vehicles, operations, support, and maintenance. And next slide, please, Tammy. And one of the things that I think really stood out for us when we were doing this is that, making sure accessibility was front and center. We partnered with the USDOT in a recent Inclusive Design Challenge, and we partnered with United Spinal, Tree, Brawnability, and a couple of other different partners to figure out, okay, what can we do for the future of autonomous vehicles to make sure we're looking at things differently. And the vehicle that we're using right now in the Go Marty program has been upfitted by Brawnability. So we have an ADA compliant wheelchair ramp, through Brawnability that you saw earlier, which is through a Toyota Sienna autonomous vehicle. But we know we can do better, and we really want to figure out, okay, the future of autonomy means different vehicle form factors. There could be rear loading doors, there could be side loading doors. How do we manage curb cuts, right? How do we manage cargo? People with multiple disabilities, all of those things we have to take into consideration. And so that was part of how we worked with the USDOT on the Inclusive Design Challenge, is figuring out, can we create automated vehicle lifts, in the next generation of vehicles, if you will. So opportunities for AVs and veterans transportation. I've actually had the privilege of working on a couple of projects years ago. One of them was called a VTCLI project, which is a Veterans Transportation and Community Living Initiative. And that was way back, about 10 years ago when this came out, recognizing that mobility and transportation are one of the biggest hindrances of quality of life for veterans and people with disabilities. At the time, we also had work done with the Department of Veterans Affairs and trying to figure out how we can bring more veterans to VA hospitals and also reduce the burden on family members that veterans had to rely upon. And one of the things that struck me about my experience working on that particular program was that how often that health outcomes are associated with transportation, especially in rural communities, where if someone could not get, you know, any transportation, they couldn't make their health appointment. And that actually contributed to a deterioration of health outcomes, whether it's preventative health care or even just getting on the spot health care due to lack of transportation. And in addition to that, on the flip side is for VA hospitals or offices and as well as other medical centers in rural communities, it also results in higher costs of visits because you have missed appointments, and then also you might have a veteran who may be at a medical appointment and wants to come home after the appointment but cannot, so they have to stay overnight another night, which results in a filled bed that may not have to be filled, right? And so the veteran isn't able to get home, and then the hospital is actually having to give up a bed that could actually serve another veteran. And so there's this cycle, that goes on. And so we're very excited to be trying to figure out a way to solve some of those challenges, through coordinated transportation as well. One of the things, as Tammy pointed out, when we work with different um, if different transit agencies or cities or communities is looking how can we coordinate transportation with the local transit agency, with the VA hospital, with the existing dial a ride or volunteer service or senior center, whatever happens to be within that community, to really supplement and complement their existing transit infrastructure, so that we can get the person, first mile, last mile, but the whole complete journey taken care of. And if we need to get creative, and so be it, we'll try. The other thing I wanted to mention as an opportunity for AVs to help is in terms of job creation. At May, we're very committed to hiring veterans as well. And one of the things that I think make veterans such a wonderful talent and potential workforce for the AV space is they're great problem solvers. They're really logistically minded in a lot of ways. So routing, mapping, all of those things are super important. And the discipline that's required to really make sure that autonomous vehicles are safe. um, Autonomy came out of the military in a lot of ways. Our founder, Ed Olson, who's very committed to the mission of autonomy for all in a lot of ways, came out of the DARPA challenge. I mean, that was really what jump started our company, and his love of autonomy and transforming cities and communities and people's lives. So job creation is a big one for us. And then the last one is, quality of life and outcomes. I talked about health outcomes. I think the dependence on loved ones is something that's very taxing for veterans, based on my experience, and just the sense of independence and being able to really fulfill, those things, whether it's jobs, education, social engagements, and really improve quality of life. And so, last slide there, very fast. This is the vehicle that we're using in Go Marty. And you'll see there's a wheelchair accessible accessibility through the rear. We know that's not ideal. We actually do have an external ramp to help with those conditions where we can't go straight up to the curbside. And it does fit one wheelchair, you know, um, wheelchair as well as 2 passengers in the front, and then also is able to accommodate service animals as well. And so we're working on trying to find new ways based on community feedback on how to improve this. I know there was mention of OEMs as well. Toyota is our OEM provider, and they are very interested in hearing about our feedback on the ground. And from an electrification standpoint, this is a hybrid, vehicle, but we are working on electric platforms as well with our OEM providers, and bringing feedback on how we can incorporate accessibility into the next generation of vehicles. And that's all I had. Thank you.
And everyone for sharing your perspectives. I think we added a lot of multidimensionality to this conversation around supporting and serving our veterans with disabilities. And so I want to start my first question, and happy to hear from you all, starting with Al. I want to know about, there were some pain points happening around transportation electrification. And so what are some lessons learned around the adoption process for electrification that we can use also when we're moving towards automation?
Well, what we experienced initially with the deployment of electric vehicles was the apprehension about, range anxiety. Basically, are the vehicles going to be fit for whatever duty cycle? So the pain points were getting people, to just open up their minds a little bit and actually get them in the seats of the vehicle. Let them know based on their duty cycle and how far they drive, doing a regular day of going back and forth to different job sites. And from a citizen's perspective as well, I mean, going from home to work, to dropping the kids off soccer practice, going to the actual grocery store. Most tour duties on that travel is not over 100 miles of range. And what we actually witnessed at the very beginning of our deployment, we had Nissan Leafs, which they only went to about 109 miles in range back in 2014. And right now they're up to 226 miles in range. Chevy Bolts we have in our departments right now, they're at 247. We have the newest 2022 Bolt EUV, which is a electric utility vehicle. So some of the pain points were just getting people to just open up and get them to look at the data. And I'm gonna tell you, from a perspective of human nature, a lot of times data drives a lot of different things, a lot of different initiatives. But we still have people that are still in their mind frame is, even though the data shows it, they're just blind to the data. It's perception but what we witnessed and what we noticed, we have to keep driving the point home. One, is going to save you money, total cost of ownership. It's going to save you in your fuel cost. It's going to the environmental impacts that we've witnessed here in Cobb, which we're working on right now, a graph where it shows the reduction greenhouse gas chart that shows our reduction in ICE vehicles, how it basically accumulates towards greenhouse gas, lowering that for the county and so on. So there's those pain points where, like I said, getting people to acknowledge the benefits and range anxiety. And we had a lot of people that were used to putting the key into the car. And most vehicles these days are push to start. And I'm gonna tell you, some of the veterans that we have working here were very apprehensive when it comes down to electric vehicles, getting them to work on them, because we work on our own vehicles here. I mean, we have our own facilities, our fueling facilities, and also about 70 different electric vehicle charging stations. We had the people thinking that if you're charging your vehicle and you're standing in the rain, you're going to get electrocuted. There's a lot of those particular stereotypes about electric vehicles are out there that over a period of time, just getting people in the seats of the vehicles, letting them understand the process, the acclimatization of going from ICE vehicles to electric. Those were some of the pain points that we ran across. But like I said, right now we've been in 8 years, and our technicians have embraced it. Our county has embraced it, and we're looking for Georgia to continue to embrace our electrification movement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Tammy and Daisy, I know you all just started the pilot but have you all found kind of having the same apprehension from your riders, and specifically your wheelchair user riders? What has been their experience, and maybe any apprehensions they've overcome through the experience so far?
Tammy, do you want to talk about some of the on the ground observations? And I can talk a little bit about numbers.
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you a couple of anecdotal experiences we've had. So we officially launched October 5th, so barely over a month now post-launch. But early on, even in the first few weeks, we realized just how important it was to give our drivers training working with wheelchairs. And the great thing about the way May operates, as Daisy said, they come in turnkey. And so there's a fair amount of testing that happens with these vehicles on the route. But as soon as we launch to the public, you introduce the people side of it, the actual riders and the variety of riders you can have and what it means to offer them, a service in essence that they want to use. And they're already maybe a little skeptical, but electric wheelchairs versus manual wheelchairs became a bit of a constraint for us. And so we had to teach our drivers, the operators of the vehicles, which I should pause for a second and explain. All of the vehicles have an operator sitting in the front seat, so they're not driverless. The vehicles are capable of operating in autonomous mode, but we have a driver sitting there, and Daisy can share a little bit more about that. The passenger seat in the front is the computer. So sitting the front two seats is one person who would be the operator. And then, as she mentioned, the two seats in the back can take riders as well as one wheelchair or not a wheelchair. And you could have 5 passengers. But when there was a wheelchair introduced, and specifically an electric wheelchair, which became quite a few times early on, it did slow them down quite a bit. The operators had to figure out how to get the wheelchairs in. There was a variety of types of electric wheelchairs. So what I've learned is they've been doing drills and learning how to work with electric wheelchairs and have gotten so much better, even just in the last few weeks, and a little bit of training in how you can work with electric wheelchairs. So that's one example. We also are tracking usage of our call center versus the app. And so I think that has been a very interesting learning to watch just how many phone calls and what types of phone calls the call center is getting up front. Things like anything from just understanding a little bit more about the technology, maybe not even wanting to set up a ride, to, where can I find this vehicle? How can I get to it? And obviously some concerns about even getting in and out. The accessibility focus on the project has actually been, I think, a great learning for every single partner that's been at the table, including those who are advocating for the accessibility. None of us really knew how much it was going to get used, but I think we've all been shocked with how many wheelchairs have boarded the vehicles just in the first few weeks.
Over 50% of the riders are wheelchair users in all of our rides, which really shows that there was pent up demand, to begin with, just for any type of transportation. And the community has been super gracious, obviously, with and patient with us. But we're excited that that's the case, and actually 71% have been repeat rides, which is also pretty amazing. So that means that I think we're doing something beneficial for the community for sure. And, as we're learning, we're actually recording all these learnings to figure out, okay, how can we make, improved iterations moving forward?
Absolutely. That's amazing. There's a question that came in from our chat, and please feel free to continue to add your questions in here, and we will do our best to ask them to our panel. This comes from Graham Sloan, and I think Lee would be the perfect person to educate us. So what's the approximate cost of the upfit for a vehicle, right? So to retrofit a vehicle strictly for the occupants. So not necessarily for the autonomous features, but the current cost for retrofitting a vehicle.
Right. Well, it's not inexpensive. Let's just say that. If you own the vehicle, meaning the van, that's an expense of whether you're buying it used or new, probably around $60,000 or so. And then the modifications will probably cost you another 40. So, and that includes, depending on the type, if you do side entrance, you have to have a lower floor mechanism that would lower the van into a kneeling position, and then have the ramp system come out, whether it comes out from underneath the vehicle or whether it folds down from within inside the vehicle. In both cases, you mentioned brawlability. That would be an ideal modification organization that does this on a regular basis. And I think y'all are doing a rear entry currently right now, which is a little bit different because I'm not sure if you have to kneel the van. I think you've got to flip up top and then the lift comes out. The question I have with that is the securement devices for the person in the wheelchair have to be administered by the driver. They're not independent. And then one of the things that you may or may not know from a wheelchair point of view, if you're a person riding in a wheelchair and you're in the back of the vehicle, if you're hitting speed bumps or potholes, the ricochet is worse in the back. So for that person, what you feel in the front seat, it's double in the back for the person in the wheelchair. So that's just, I advocate for cautious driving in that vein. But the cost, as your original question, it's significant to a degree because it's aftermarket modification. It'd be different if the OEMs took accessibility into question in the beginning. True accessible autonomy would be low floor entry, which is something that startup tech companies may be doing, but you know, on a broader scale, that would be true accessibility is low floor entries.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us like an actionable step and kind of something to be considering that may even be applicable to policy, which really leads me into my last question before we wrap up. And I hate that this conversation is ending so quickly. You all shared so much. I have so many questions I could ask, but you know, what do we need to do to move electric automated policy forward, right? How can veterans use their voice in this space? Like Lee, like Wayne, like Al, what can we do as a collective to advance this agenda?
What I've experienced and what I've been doing to further move this movement is join some of the fleet administration that talk to the White House, that talk to the Capitol. I'm on the actual board for the National Association of Fleet Administrators, and we go up to the Capitol and advocate for different policies and different things that affect our industry. Another thing that I do, I'm on the Chattahoochee Tech Board that works with the actual professors on letting them know what type of training that our technicians are needing for this electrification movement, because a lot of the colleges they're a little bit behind when it comes down to training technicians that are going to be working on these electric vehicles. I mean, it's easy to put these, it's not easy, but the ground to put these vehicles out is out there, but when it's time for them to come back for service, short of not changing out batteries, but just the standard general maintenance, there's not a lot of maintenance on these vehicles that you have to worry about. But still, just getting our technicians acclimated to it in the training aspect from a college and university standpoint. There is some traction going on, but we need more advocates when it comes down to that as far as the training and getting the word out to the colleges and of course the White House and different fleet associations, talking to the big three on getting them on board. What like Lee was talking about from the ground up manufacturing. He made a really good point about some startups. We're seeing a lot of startups that are looking at and gravitating towards ADA and those particular things, looking at disabled veterans and just accessibility in that respect. the big three, they need to listen to that as well and start making a little bit more progress towards it. As everybody knows that they're a little bit behind when it comes down to electrification, because they're using a lot of the aftermarket platforms to build their vehicles. And you know, so I think they're doing a little bit better in learning that they need to start leaning towards that, or getting some of their technical people involved in putting together their own platforms as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the other avenue for policy compliance is for advocating either up on Capitol Hill or through DOT, Department of Transportation. And, you know, the Biden administration just sunk $1 billion into electric chargers going across the country for electric vehicles, which is great infrastructure for that industry. And as you mentioned earlier, Al, about people trusting electric cars to go the distance or what have you, it's a burgeoning industry that needs more education to the people for them to trust the system. You know, autonomous vehicles are the same way. It's an education piece.
Sure.
It's an education piece on Capitol Hill. I think the Department of Transportation, Secretary Pete, is very interested in electric and autonomous vehicles. And as I mentioned in my opening, I'm about the compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. And one mode of transportation, most modes of transportation that are public fall under the ADA for compliance. As I mentioned, airplanes have a different law. But autonomous vehicles are a public accommodation under Title III. So they're going to have ADA requirements when they get up and running on a full category base, in my opinion. And hopefully the Department of Transportation sees it that way also.
Well, thank you both so much for your action steps. I think those are phenomenal. We're going to end with some closing remarks from Wayne Jones. I'll hand it over to you, Wayne.
Well, before I close, if I could, I'd like to hand it over to Tammy to speak just one last time, because between you and Daisy, you know, you're doing some great things on the ground, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity before we close for some brief comments.
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. I guess in closing, I would just highlight one area that I think we didn't talk about what, you know, around what could you do to continue to push this topic with our veterans and allow for some action items from them. I would also look at the area of workforce and workforce development and the opportunities that are presenting itself with the funding that's going into this industry and the technology that is shifting. There are so many wonderful opportunities that are coming forward for upskilling and reskilling our workforce, which certainly would allow for veterans to get involved in something new. And I know a lot of times when veterans are re-entering, looking for ways that they can re-enter as a civilian, and there are so many great upskilling and reskilling programs that are in process. Just looking at the topic of a technician and what it might take to service and maintenance these vehicles, those are going to be in-demand skills. And so I would say in the area of workforce, that's one that shouldn't be overlooked for our veterans.
Well, thanks, Tammy. And I'd like to thank Allanté for her masterful facilitation of this webinar. And for our guests, we want to thank you all for taking your time and being here with us today. Hopefully you understand that this is important to us here at SAFE and the Electrification Coalition and Center for Reimagining Mobility. It's important to us for a lot of reasons. You know, but at the end of the day, we see autonomous electric vehicles have great promise for our veterans. And for the disabled community writ large. But as Lee so eloquently points out, there's a lot of challenges, and we have to meet those challenges. And I think it's up to us as SAFE and the Electrification Coalition, working with you to work on the policy, to talk to the policy people here in DC and make sure that they understand that these vehicles have to be purpose-built as we move forward. And if we do take those considerations in up front, then we have a great opportunity for building out, you know, mobility, you know, freedom and a sense of dignity for our veterans and other folks who have disabilities to give them a better quality of life. And I would just close by saying, I hope this isn't the last time we talk, because I think that there's a lot of other things we could have covered. And hopefully we're able to continue to partner with you and others on this webinar further in the future. So on behalf of SAFE, Electrification Coalition, and REMO, and everyone here, thank you very much for participating.